Hey, what's going on everybody? Ragnarok here, and I wanted to upload the 9th game from the World Open that I ended up tying for first place. Just to recreate what happened, there were 4 of us with 7.5 points. We were all versing each other. And about the move before I made a big mistake in this game, maybe a couple moves before, the other 2 players had drawn. So I had a chance to win the entire tournament if I won this game. And I definitely see some ideas how I could have, and I see some ideas how I could have lost miserably. So this guy was rated about 1620, but you know, he was no joke. He was a really, really good player. He played the London opening, so d4, knight to f6, and then bishop to f4. You can also do the knight first out to f3, and then develop the bishop. Both are good. I play c5 directly to try to distract him. If he does ever take, I can check, maybe just kind of weaken the queen side. And I try to use that tension. So he plays e3. Now he is outside of the pawn chain with his bishop. And I see this as a weakness, so I want to go after that eventually. But I also want to continue my King's Indian idea because this bishop becomes really strong and puts more pressure on d4. So he plays c3, just kind of solidifying that pawn. I go after the b2 pawn. He brings his queen out, and I don't trade right away. If I trade, he gets a better, I'll just show you, he gets a better way to start pushing pawns. Maybe I could take here, but he's not going to isolate these pawns, and this looks kind of strong compared to my pawns not doing anything in the center. So instead, I develop bishop g7, he goes bishop e2, d6 just to prevent the bishop from coming in here. And also, you know, gives my queen a place to move back to. It allows me to eventually push e5. Brings his knight to defend his queen. I castle, get out of the way of any checks. He goes h3, a common move in London, so you can back your bishop up. I probably could have played this at some point, but I didn't want to lose my hold on the center. Develop my knight, just put more pressure on d4. He defends d4. And now bishop to e6, which is probably a little bit of a weird move, but my goal was to try to get him to make some sort of structural weakness with this pawn. He does end up coming forward, which is a bit of a mistake, but I think better, you know, he could have probably come here. His goal probably is eventually to bring his knight here too, although this probably doesn't work in this scenario because I go here, and I pretty much win something. I think it's probably just a pawn right now, but I don't know. So it's not really good to bring his knight there. Best is probably the bishop here. I don't have any immediate attack ideas. Maybe it's the exact same thing. I don't know. Yeah, I guess in that scenario it would. But he could also, I guess, move his queen out of the way. But then that's kind of giving into the face-off that these 2 queens have against each other. So he goes c4, making a weakness, and then I bring my bishop up. So I can defend his push of e4. Again, not the greatest move. I mean, maybe he could push this, kind of forcing me to come back. Don't really want to give up my bishop in this scenario, but I want to try to control this file and keep the bishop and queen off of it. That's my plan anyway. He castles, I bring my knight in. When he takes, I take back with queen first, forcing him to undouble his pawn or double his pawns. He does get the compensation of an open rook. I would have as well if he had taken my queen. I would have taken back with pawn and had an open file attack on the a2 pawn. So then I take the knight back, he takes here, and my goal really was to get over here. The threat is if he does something like this, now that the a pawn is gone, my knight is very, very strong here. This pawn eventually can hang, or at least this knight is stuck here, and then maybe I can bring my knight in and force him to trade. So that's the plan. But he takes back, he takes my d-pawn, c-pawn with his d-pawn, I take back, and then kind of limits my plans, because if I come here now, this looks a little deadly. Both of these bishops just controlling a really, really good diagonal for them. So instead I bring my rook over, his bishop takes my knight on c6, and then I take his bishop back. So I have double pawns, but this kind of helps block him from coming here. So I'm okay with these double pawns right now. He pushes e4 because the threat was my rook taking his knight on d2. So he goes here. I double attack the b pawn. I can't do it this way because this bishop is still controlling this diagonal. Maybe an idea could be to do this first. And then if he came back, I felt like this pawn was not defendable. I don't know. there's too many things to hold on to, I think, in this game. That's what made it a little bit complex. So anyway, he comes up here. I thought in the game he was going to come here to defend this pawn. And then what I would have done probably would be just double my rooks up, maybe eventually trade here, go play off the weakness of these pawns and prove that two bishops are stronger than two bishops and a rook are stronger than two rooks. In this scenario, I think that they are. So when he comes up to a6, threatening to take both of these pawns if this rook moves. Passive would be to come here, but I think here is pretty good. Try to be able to take this pawn, or this knight. He moves away, really just giving up this pawn, I guess. I didn't really understand this move, but I took the pawn back, and then he just takes the a pawn. And here's where I made that mistake I was talking about, where the other people did have a draw right now. I probably had used maybe an hour and 20 minutes or so, so I had like 40 minutes left. Maybe I moved a little quick here, but the best plan, I think, is really just to take this pawn with either the rook or the bishop. Maybe he takes back here, but this looks really good. Like, this pawn is going to go under at some point. This pawn is gone right now, and I think this is just winning for black. Maybe he goes like this to try to swing around and attack here, but I think I'm doing okay. But instead what happens is I take this pawn, which I didn't realize was a huge mistake because the move is knight to d2. I now cannot defend both my bishop and my rook, and I've essentially lost a piece. So my best scenario was to say, where is this knight going to be in two moves? And he's going to be on this on the e4 square. And then both of these can't be defended at the same time, so why don't I just swing in here and take this pawn? So that's what I do. Take the pawn back. If he moves either one of these, it is I get my piece back, which is fine. But he defends here. The better move would have been rook takes e7. Now, if I push f5 like I plan to do, because again, if he moves this knight, I'm going to take this bishop. He comes in here. I take the rook, or the bishop. He now takes bishop with check, king takes rook, and then he forks and wins a piece back, no matter where I go. So that's why he should have played rook takes e7. So yeah, I mean, he definitely would have won the game if he played that, because with trading off all my pieces at that point, it's all forced, and I'd be down material. So that would have lost the game, but instead he brings his rook over to e1. I do my f4 move, or f5 move. He moves away, winning the bishop back. But then from here, I think the best move, he forks my rook, and he made this move really quickly. And I was talking to him after the game. He just felt like I had this really cool move, and I thought it was great. And I think just taking more time, he would have found that this move looks a lot better. I don't really have any checks. I've got the same threat against me. Yeah, because if I check, I mean, he just comes up. There's no issue, and I win this pawn. But he has attacks on this bishop. If I move away, he's got this fork, and if I move away again, it doesn't look good. I think there's mate right here. Yeah, so this would be really, really good for him. I mean, he could also just take here. There's a lot of threats that he has going on, so I think he should have taken that that pawn, but instead he comes here. Maybe better, a good way to resolve this is here, because if he takes my rook, check, and then it's an even game. I don't know, maybe I've got some compensation because of the pass pawns, or eventual pass pawns. I can win one pawn back here. So that's how it could have played out. Instead I go here, let him take the rook, and then he takes my e7 pawn eventually, but I take this and create some strong pass pawns. There is no checkmate here because this bishop controls this this square. Taking here is also a mistake. I think better is probably just, so it's important to note he can't come here to attack this pawn because I have a nice little maneuver of check and then check, and I win the pawn, the piece back. This bishop's just too strong right now. So I don't know, maybe something like this to try to attack the pawn. I don't know. But taking this pawn is just a little too greedy, I think. So I start pushing my pawn. It's important to note I can't push c3 with the bishop being blocked, because then I have, well, let's just see what it would look like if he goes here. I think he would probably come here, check. Maybe it's a draw. Or maybe he just wins this and then eventually can win this piece. And if I push, he always has... actually, maybe I queen. I don't know. So at the very least, maybe it's just a draw. So I don't really want to block that. Because now that this passed pawn becomes powerful, you know, I want to do something with it. So instead, he slides back, and as we've seen, check, and then I win the piece back here. The difference now, by the way, he had to block with the pawn because his king was stuck. It's almost mate, actually. The difference now is that I've got this passed pawn, and he only has a rook to block it. So it looks like it's winning for me, but I guess I missed something, so I come back here, defending both of these pawns. He goes around. I thought that if I start pushing, he has to come here to defend, and then I would push, and if he comes here to block, I defend, and I'm in time in order to have these, and eventually this king is going to help queen. That's what I saw anyway. But then he played rook to a4, which is a good move. So that means that my best move probably was to just come here, c5, because now if he comes here, I can defend this. If he comes back, I think maybe I come here, take, check, and then and it's possibly a one game. It's a little bit better off, I think. So that probably would have been better. But instead he goes here. I decide to give up that pawn so I can get my king centralized, and then I allow him to trade rooks because I thought I was better off. Turns out it's actually a draw. It's a dead draw from here. Even if I came here, maybe check here, I don't know. Maybe that's a win. But instead I allowed him to do check. He takes my rook, and then it's a draw. We'll just play out some of the moves. He has to go this way to defend the pawn. The reason it's a draw and not a win with my outside pass pawn is because he has 3, and these 3 will beat these 2 pawns on the king side, and it will force me to give up the c pawn. So I push, and this is where he begins with h4. Check. My goal was to get these pawns, but he pushes with g4. And now if I take this pawn, it's actually a loss because I take, he takes, and I can't catch this pawn. And I'm one move too soon, too short. So that's what would have happened instead. I took the pawn. Actually thought right here, I thought maybe I'd blown a one game, and maybe I did. But I was forced to take here. I offered a draw. He said play it out anyway, and take, and it's a draw anyway. So I'll put the notation in the description below if you guys want to check it out. But that was the game that ultimately tied, four-way tie for first place in the World Open. So the people below us actually, none of them did what they should have. There were people with 6.5 that could have tied us. The 2 6.5s drew, and the other 6.5 lost. So that left us with 4 people at 7.5. So it was a really awesome tournament. I plan to do new ones in the future, but that was a really big prize pool. And most of the other tournaments around here are maybe like maybe 1,000 for first place, 2,000, but this one was much higher. So I'll definitely be doing it next year. My rating jumped up to 1845, so I'm not going to be doing any under 1800s anymore. And hopefully you guys enjoyed it. So I'm going to continue doing my live chess splits while also writing on ragchess.com. So check out that site. Let me know if there's any ideas you want to me to write about. But I'm going to be doing some basic stuff, you know, how to set up the board and basic stuff. But I'll be going into further depth as well as I kind of flesh out the ideas for this website. But I'll continue uploading the Blitz stuff because it's quick and easy for me to do. Join the Discord if you haven't. It's in the description below so that we can maybe play, or you can play other people that eventually join over there. And I'll see you guys around. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. See you next time.